everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I'm getting back into some Bigfoot stories. I haven't really talked about Bigfoot in over a month. We've been talking about Goatman and werewolves, out of place animals, some ghost stories with Elsie and Amy last week. So, haven't really touched on Bigfoot in a while and wanted to talk about Bigfoot this week, mainly due to the fact that the lovely Rebecca and I, we did another Mammoth March hike up in Letchworth State Park, which is in Western New York, near like the Finger Lakes area. I did an episode last year about Cayuga Lake and the Cayuga Lake Monster, Old Greenie. And that one was a very popular episode. People seem to really love that one, even though I'm not really big into lake monsters. Bigfoot guy here. But the Lake Monster episode did really well. And we were hiking in Letchworth, and as I do on this show, I tend to investigate the history of the area that we go to, any new areas that I've gone to or old areas I've been to, and talk about ghost stories and UFO sightings and Bigfoot encounters. And this was no different. So we are going to be hiking through Letchworth State Park, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to do an episode on Bigfoot sightings in Letchworth." Much to my chagrin, there are none. None that I could find. I'm sure there are. Maybe they're just not online or they're not in the places I was looking, but I Googled it extensively. I couldn't really find any sightings in the park, and nor could I find any sightings in the counties that the park is in. So that was a little disheartening for me because the park itself, there are areas of it that are very squatchy, and Letchworth is beautiful. It's this huge gorge, big waterfalls, beautiful. And it had rained terribly up there on our way up. And the day that we hiked, we had really good weather, but the waters were muddy and really, really flowing. So, but it's a beautiful park. And the hike was much easier than the Mammoth March we did last year, which absolutely wrecked us. This one was much easier on our bodies. And I mean, I'm still dealing with my own health issues here that hampered me a bit, but I completed it. I finished the hike. So that is awesome. And they plant a tree for every hiker who signs up. So you're kind of doing a good deed as well as getting out in nature. And for me, being out in nature it just is so healing for me. To get out of the city, to get out of my apartment, to get away from politics and social media and all the fighting and phones ringing and neighbors leaving their dogs outside to bark and all that stuff. It's just nice to get out in nature and see, beautiful sunsets and beautiful scenery and waterfalls. It was just a great time. So, but alas, there are no Bigfoot sightings near Letchworth or in Letchworth that I could find. If you know of any sightings in Letchworth, or if you've had a sighting in Letchworth or in the counties that Letchworth is in, I'd love to hear about it. So shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. But I figured I'll touch on Western New York because I do the Adirondacks a lot. I talk about the Adirondacks a lot because that's where I spend a lot of my time in camping. And we all know there's tons of Bigfoot sightings up in the Adirondacks, Whitehall, New York, and just in the Adirondacks in general. But I've never really touched on Western New York. So I thought I would do that today for Steuben County, which we drove through. And there are some of the cities here, Bath and some of the other cities that I'm going to talk about here tonight that we drove through on our way to our hike to stay near Letchworth that do have some Bigfoot sightings. So we're going to talk about that today. And I'll do other parts of Western New York as well in future episodes. But today I just wanted to talk about these episodes inspired not near Letchworth State Park, but inspired by my trip to Letchworth State Park. So let's get into some cool Bigfoot stories. All right, so I'm going to go in a bit of reverse chronological order here. So the most recent ones, and then I'll work our way back. This is a Class A report submitted by witness Bill Frisk in 2022. And this one is titled, Turkey Hunter Observes a Sasquatch in Daylight 2 miles southwest of Erwin. And Erwin is one of the towns in Steuben that we kind of drove past on our way to Letchworth. So this sighting took place in 2022 in May on the 17th. Location details on the north end of Erwin Mountain State Forest, 1,500 feet elevation. Nearest town is Erwin. Nearest road is Beartown Road. Observed. Town of Erwin, New York State, when I was hunting spring turkeys. I was sitting at the base of a tree location at the top of a ridge line that connected to another ridge. I was calling gobbler turkeys that were on their roost trees, when at which time the gobblers flew down off the ridge from their roost. I was still sitting at the base of the tree, having not moved location for a half hour, when I noticed something walking on two legs approximately 75 yards away. The thing was about 7 feet tall. I first thought maybe another human was there hunting, but then it was apparent to me that it was dark reddish brown from head to feet. The thing was in my view of sight for about 4 to 5 seconds and then went behind a tree, and that was the last I seen it. Then, about 15 minutes later, I have not moved from the base of the tree, sitting on the ground, same spot. To my left, approximately 30 yards, an object hit a tree about 25 feet up in the tree. Then the object that hit the tree hit the ground, sounded like a rock. I continued through the area for the rest of the morning with no further incident. I have hunted in New York for 42 years and never witnessed something like this before. Also noticed, I did notice some musky sense of smell odor. No other witnesses, no other stories that this person's aware of. This was approximately 6 a.m. The environment ride topped some hemlock, pine, mostly hardwood oak, and other hardwood trees with a secluded, great size pond further into the woods. So let me talk about the follow-up investigation by the famous Matthew Moneymaker of Finding Bigfoot, and also the originator of the BFRO website, where I'm pulling some of these reports, all of these reports tonight. So he says, I spoke with Bill Frisk. He is a 55-year-old retired corrections officer. He is originally from Elmira, New York. He worked as a prison guard for most of his life, first at Sing Sing Prison and then Sullivan Prison, and then finally Willard Prison for the past 19 years. He has hunted spring turkeys for the past 42 years. His oldest son, 32, returned to investigate the next day. His son stands 5'10". He stood at a spot where the figure was standing. The figure was at least 1 foot, I'm guessing, taller than the son. Observer's distance to the figure, 75 yards away. It took 3 steps to move behind a tree and out of view. He saw arms swinging as it took steps. And there's some maps here that progressively get a little closer. And if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify video, Letchworth is up here near the city of Geneseo, kind of a little bit southwest of it. I'm circling it on my map. So that's kind of where we were, but we kind of drove here through past 390. Through Bath, and down here is Erwin. So, like I said, a squatchy area. So I was surprised actually that I couldn't find any sightings in Letchworth. But to talk about this sighting, this is an interesting one. This is a corrections officer. This is someone who's licensed with weapons. He's been hunting for many years, over 40 years. Sees this creature, and again, at first, is not thinking Bigfoot. He's thinking it's another person, another hunter, possibly in a ghillie suit. But then he notices that it's reddish brown, that it's 7 feet tall, and then it just kind of goes out of view. So very interesting. The rock hitting the tree, I don't know what to make of that. Again, things fall out of trees. It could be very difficult to determine what it was. It could have been a branch. It could have been a pine cone. Things in the woods can sound very different. I do tend to err on the side of the witness, though, because I think someone who's been hunting for many years knows the difference between like a dead branch falling from a tree, or a pine cone, or a walnut, or a chestnut, an acorn, versus a rock being thrown and hitting a tree up high and then falling. And he did sense a musky smell, which we do hear in many Bigfoot reports, just the sort of wet dog or garbage or on a hot day sort of smell, or decaying thing. So it's usually not a pleasant smell, usually a musky smell. So very interesting. It was 6 a.m. And he did go back the next day to kind of bring his son and say, where was this creature standing? How tall was it? Now that we have someone to put there and gauge, and 75 yards is fairly close. Like, you're not going to mistake something else for this. This was not a bear. So maybe another hunter in a ghillie suit, 7 foot tall, or Bigfoot. But I will let you guys make up your own mind about that. Tell me what you guys think this was. And again, here's some close-ups of Erwin Mountain State Forest. So you can see it's not terribly far from civilization, but there's not a lot down here. There's some highways and Dell's Bar and Grill and Orlando Lakes, but forested area. So very possible that something was in there. So let me know what you guys think about this one. Okay, so story number two. A resident observes a Sasquatch near homes at 2 or 3 a.m. on the outskirts of Bath. And again, Bath is a town that we passed through on our way to Letchworth. This was submitted by witness Alan Y. This experience happened in November of 2012. He's not sure the exact date. Again, Steuben County. Location details, edge of the village of Bath in the town of Bath. So there's a lot of villages up there. You don't hear a lot of towns. You hear like village, the village of, so very, very it's rural up there. And I loved it. Cornfields and rolling hills and quaint little towns. Just, it was great being up there. So let me continue. The witness was observing from 6876 Lakeview Terrace in Bath, New York. The creature was behind another building at 7026 East Washington Street. So I'm going to read this. This is a lengthy one, so bear with me. Nearest road is Washington Street Extension. Observed. Visual report. My name is Alan Y. On about in the middle of November 2012, I had a very unusual experience that at first kept me very mixed up, but always stayed in my mind until I started doing research. It was about 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. I awoke to go outside and have a smoke. The area of the town of Bath, New York, is semi-rugged with hundreds of huge foothills. There is a vast amount of forests, lakes, ponds, wildlife, and many state parks. Much of the land is posted no hunting. The hills are super steep, so climbing or hiking is difficult. We rented the full basement apartment of a home. Our entryway was in the back of the home, semi-underground. There was a deck over our entryway. I am an ex-U.S. Army Intel Special Tasking veteran who served in Central America and the Middle East. I'm telling you this because I am a trained observer and weigh out everything I see. I am super aware of my surroundings. That morning, I went outside and lit up a cigarette. It was very dark this night and cool. Deer would constantly wander through, and many times I could be 10 feet from a deer and be silent so as not to spook them. As I lit up my smoke, some movement caught my attention about roughly 140 yards directly in front of me to the east. A cinnamon brownish colored figure was pacing back and forth over and over. On each side of this clear cut, there was a couple of homes. This thing was at the far end by the next tree line, pacing back and forth, moving towards the last home and back again, moving approximately north to south, then back the other way. It was moving erratically, pacing back and forth like it was confused or undecided if it wanted to go closer to the home. So to stop for a second, again, we're hearing about this reddish brown figure. And, this is not far from the first encounter I talked about here. So just wanted to point that out, same color. So to continue, as I looked at first, I thought it was a drunk person, but in all the years I lived there, I never seen anyone out there. As I watched, what really caught my attention was it looked like it was floating across the ground, as there was absolutely no head bob at all. The ground rose between myself and this entity and went back down on its side, so I cannot see the lower legs. Good, or well. It kept on pacing back and forth for about 3 minutes. At the position I was at, under the deck, in the shadows, I was not observed by this creature. I'm not afraid of too much, but for some reason the hairs stood up on the back of my neck and I got into what I call combat mode. I wanted to bellow out at this entity, but something said, do not do that. Around 3 or 4 minutes of this pacing, I turned my head for a second and it was gone. I got a fearful sense of where this thing went and had a feeling it may try to flank me around the 2 homes. So I went into the house and awakened my wife and said, there's something weird out there. I did not think of Bigfoot right away because it was not the Patty type I've seen on the Patterson and Gimlin film. I thought that they are in the Northwest, not really here in New York State. And that's something a lot of people don't realize. They think of Bigfoot as the Pacific Northwest, California, Oregon, Washington, up in Canada. They don't think of Bigfoot here in New York. It was, I believe, 6 or 7 feet tall, a slimmer build. And this is interesting because this is when I was talking to Brian Gosselin a few months ago on the show, and he was telling me about his experience. He said the same thing. It was tall but slim. It's not the bulky Patty type from the Patterson Gimlin film. It's this sort of slimmer type. He said it looked like it had missed a few meals. So not the big hulking, bulky type of Bigfoot that we normally think about. So he continues, wide on top and slimmer than Patty, more like a fine-tuned athlete than a bodybuilder, long arms and an awfully long, shaggy head of hair, which stood out to me. Weird. The reason I even saw it was because there was a light on at the home that he was pacing towards that lit it up and some of the area. Upon seeing it after the fact, I realized that there was a hedgerow running parallel to it and a large ravine behind that ran into the woods. Across from this property was a road, a couple of mobile homes, then a very steep wooded foothill, small mountain. For years, this baffled me, and I could not get this out of my mind until I visited the BFRO website and seen at least 6 reports entirely around my area. Thank you for having a website where we can go to get these things off our chest. So, yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize this, and then they Google it, and you notice that, oh, there's a lot of other stories from this area. So interesting. Also noticed November 2019 heard 2 huge body shaking screams from the ridgeline very close adjacent to my new home in Bath, close to the same area. Very loud, not any animal I know of here. I know what I seen and I know what I heard. So you have, again, a person who's experienced, he was in the military, a trained observer, not scared of much. In South America, in the Middle East, this is someone who's been there and done that, seen some things, and now is seeing this thing and doesn't know what to make of it. Other stories, yes, on this website, and a hunter told me he's seen a creature while hunting in Cameron State Park, close to the other BFRO sightings. This one is also followed up by Matt Moneymaker, who says, I spoke with the witness by phone. He is who he says he is, a retired Army vet. He is credible. The main question with this report is whether he misidentified a human at that distance, 140 yards. So I do appreciate not discounting the witness, but again, we have to question everything. We have to say, could this have been a person? Could this have been a bear? Could this have been any other misidentification? So Matt continues, one test that anyone can do in these circumstances is to open the phone app, Google Earth, zoom in on your own street, wherever you have a view for at least a block, use the ruler function to set a point where you are standing, then measure to a point 420 feet away, which is 140 yards. At 420 feet, you would be able to see an illuminated figure well enough to see if it's a bear or if it's wearing clothes or appears to be covered with fur. During the conversation, he mentioned that the face appeared to be a slightly lighter color of skin than the cinnamon brown hair, but beyond that, he could not discern facial details. Check that yourself at 420 feet. Can you see if a person's face is lighter color than the hair, but not much more? The creature was 30 to 40 feet from the nearest house. It was illuminated by a light in the back of the house. It was pacing back and forth, 20 to 25 foot span. It had very smooth gait when pacing back and forth. He said it had shaggy, twisted sister hair. So if you think of Dee Snider, I'll put up a picture here, just more horrifying than Bigfoot. A deep ravine was right behind where it was pacing. Lots of deer come around these houses at night. Most land around there is posted no hunting. He could only see the figure from the hips up. Below that, it was obscured by a rise in the ground between him and the spot it was pacing. There was no snow on the ground at the time. So an interesting feature is a lot of people will say when Bigfoot moves, it doesn't look like a man in a costume who's sort of struggling with the terrain and the bulk of the costume. It's just this very smooth, fluid motion. This is a creature that is used to the terrain and used to moving in this terrain. So I thought that was interesting. He doesn't really embellish. He's not adding a ton of info here. He's saying he can see the face. He could tell it was a little bit lighter than the hair around it, but that he couldn't really see details. He couldn't see the legs. So he can't really see how it's walking, but he's seeing this humanoid figure sort of moving, pacing back and forth. So really interesting. It's interesting to me that it's behind a house, because we do hear a lot of stories about Bigfoot peeking in windows and slapping on houses. I know I've gotten some comments on some of my YouTube videos. People have said they grew up with this, or they've had experiences with the house slap. It almost sounds like a big hand, just, like a person almost just slapping the side of the house. And like, what could that be? Like, what's going to go up and just smack the side of a house? Doesn't sound like a tree. Doesn't, they said it sounds like an open palm slap. And we do hear this in a lot of Bigfoot stories. Again, the window peeking and the hand slapping on the side of the house. So it makes you wonder if this creature was contemplating looking in the window or slapping on the side of the house or what. Just very weird to me. And again, this one also has maps. So if you're watching here on YouTube or any other video platform, you can kind of see where the houses are, where the witness was over here, where the figure was. And there is a tree line back here where it could sort of, if it wanted to get out of the neighborhood. At the same time, there's a lot of open area here. So, and a lot of houses. Somebody could, I know it's 2 or 3 in the morning, but someone could peek out and see this creature. So it is exposing itself. So very interesting. I wouldn't know what this creature would be doing. You can see the satellite view. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 houses that I can see in here. Distinct houses. These might be sheds up here in the upper right, but uh, the witness is seeing something walking back and forth, and maybe it can disappear into the woods and just get away from there. But a weird behavior for a creature that is allegedly shy and smart. But again, they dart out in front of cars too, allegedly. So what do we make of that? I don't know. Okay, moving on to story number 3. This is another long one, so bear with me. Campers describe incidents over 3 to 4 hours with unseen animal near their camp outside Prattsburgh. So this happened on November 9th, 2003. Nearest town is Prattsburgh. Nearest road is Gay Road. Observed. This account happened on the night of the lunar eclipse back in 2003. I was camping with my friend Pete in New York up behind his cabin, about a quarter mile up the hill. It was about 11 p.m., and we were both in our bags in the shelter we built. Pete was already asleep. I was trying to sleep, but couldn't, so I was poking the fire with a long stick. I heard something coming down the hill. I heard rustling leaves, etc., but figured it was deer coming down the game trail. It is tough to tell where sounds come from at night and judge distance in the woods because it's so quiet. But I figured it was pretty far out, about 150 to 200 yards, moving to our left. I heard some sort of popping sound like the trunk of a tree being hit with something solid, or 2 2x4s being smacked together, and a few growls, kind of like a lion, but higher pitched, kind of like a stomach growling. I still didn't really pay attention. I dismissed the popping as trees cracking and the growling to Pete's stomach or a low volume snore. Whatever this thing was, it circled our camp, keeping the same distance away. All I heard was the rustle of leaves or twig snaps. I kept hearing the popping sound occasionally, but I still wasn't freaked out. The sound eventually stopped basically where it started, hearing it. I started thinking that whatever it was a predator, showing stalking behavior. I figured it was a bear, fox, or some other predator / scavenger that thought it was a good idea to leave us alone. But then I started getting a really creepy feeling that I was being watched. I thought my mind was playing tricks, and I was imagining it, but it got worse and worse. I couldn't hear anything definitive in the woods, but it was still I was still getting creeped out. Interesting. Again, he's not thinking Bigfoot. He's thinking bear. He's thinking other predator. He's trying to dismiss these things or explain them. The popping is the trees cracking. It's getting colder at night, so the wood is contracting. The growling was maybe his friend's stomach. So he's trying to explain these things, and maybe partially out of fear, maybe partially out of just common sense, but it doesn't seem like he's thinking Bigfoot yet. So to continue, I could only see part of the woods because only part of our shelter is open. But I started looking around from my bag inside the shelter, not walking around, and what I could see was lit up pretty well because of the full moon, after the lunar eclipse anyway. I looked into a stand of trees and saw a really big dark spot. It looked like a broken off tree trunk darkened by shadow, in basically the same spot where the noises stopped. I looked around the woods a little more and came back to the same spot where I saw the tree looking thing, and it was gone. I woke Pete up so I could tell him what was going on, and so I would know I wasn't crazy if I heard something again. I was telling him what was going on when we heard the popping, thudding sound again. He loaded his gun. Pete has a permit to carry a handgun in New York. And in New York State, you can carry rifles, shotguns without a permit outside of New York City. We got out of our bags and restoked the fire, and I heard his stomach growl really loud. He said, "Man, you must be hungry." I said, "I thought that was his stomach," and we just looked at each other. We went to investigate where I saw the disappearing shadow thing, and we made a lot of noise to scare off whatever it was, breaking branches, kicking at the leaves, talking, yelling to each other. We looked around the woods a bit. I heard something up on the ridge, keeping pace with us, but moving away. It didn't run, just moved away from us at the rate we were moving toward it. We stayed up for a little while longer and heard nothing, so we went back to bed. Pete was out like a light, and I stayed awake just listening. Sounds like me. Everybody else falls asleep before me. I'm always up late. About 30 minutes later, the thing came back. I woke Pete up as I heard it come down off the hill from the same direction it started from. It was making a truckload of noise, banging trees. We think it actually pushed one over, too. It growled a few times, and its footsteps were really heavy. Based upon how Pete and I sounded moving through the woods earlier, this thing had to weigh much more than the both of us. I'm 6'2" and 250 pounds. It came in on our left and walked behind our camp about 30 to 50 yards. We couldn't see it because it was on the non-open side of our shelter, and we didn't want to pop out and provoke an attack. It kept walking in the same direction and eventually was out of earshot, but we figured that was enough of a warning. We packed up and went back to the cabin. Good idea. There are many screwed up things about this. First, I've been hunting for years and I don't get spooked. Pete is ex-military and no slouch in the woods either. But this spooked us bad enough to make us want to pack up the gear at 2 a.m, leaving some of it on the hill and come back to the cabin. Second, 2 of us heard this thing, so I know it's not just my mind playing tricks on me. It was definitely there. Third, this thing was massive. It made a whole bunch of noise when it walked behind our camp, more than any other animal I've ever heard, and its footsteps almost shook the ground. But here comes the most screwed up part of the story. I've hunted for 15 plus years and know what animals sound like coming through the woods. I have heard deer, bear, fox, etc., just about any animal in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Maine. And of course, other hunters. I can tell you with 100% certainty this thing was walking on 2 feet. I checked the area the next day and found a large footprint in soft earth, about 3 inches longer than mine and about 2 inches wider. I wear a size 12. I tracked the animal, or whatever, for a few hundred yards, but only found one other definite track, and it was the same size roughly. I also found a dead tree that was knocked to the ground, probably the night before, fresh earth on the roots, leaves under around it disturbed. I presume it was the large crash we heard the night before. Other stories just as would have been just what has been written on this site, and I only read it after the fact. So this one is interesting. Again, you have hunters, you have ex-military, you have a lot of skeptics want you to believe that people who see Bigfoot are uneducated, drunk, drug addict, rednecks. They throw every sort of disparaging feature they can think of, that these are people who are drunk, these are people who are not used to being in the woods, these are people who are not experienced. But you have guys who are ex-military, experienced hunters. They're not city folk going into the woods for the first time ever and hearing things, because if you don't know what you're hearing, it can be scary. Like he said, the woods at night, it could be really hard to tell, like, is that a squirrel running through the leaves, or is that a big creature trying to step lightly? You don't know. But at a certain point, you do know. If it starts really making noise, you can tell when something is really big, or not. So I tend to put some stock in this. Could it have been a bear? Absolutely. Except for the fact that he says that he knew this thing was walking on 2 feet. Bears are four-legged, and bipeds have a different sort of rhythm when they walk. So when you hear the 2 feet, that always makes me pay more attention. So really interesting. So we have a follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Paul Mateja, and he says he spoke with the witness on 7/17/07. He reiterated most of the events as detailed in his report. The following may assist the reader. The lunar eclipse occurred on November 9th, 2003. After the eclipse, there was a bright full moon. Visibility was very good. And these are things you got to, use in order to verify a story. The moon, was it actually full or not? His friend and he constructed a lean-to type camp. The events started to occur between 10 and 11 p.m. However, he's not sure of the time, but stated it was after the eclipse had ended. He saw the figure. It looked like a broken off tree trunk at a distance of 50 to 60 yards. And that is something we hear a lot too. People will see what they think is a tree trunk, and then it stands up and walks away. And they're like, what? The animal had paced them as he walked around the camp, trying to scare it away. We hear that a lot too, the paralleling, the pacing. Several low growls were heard. Recently, he has heard similar growls on the Sierra Sounds CD. I will link to that in the description below. At its closest point to camp, it came within 30 to 40 yards. It always seemed to stay just out of sight. The animal left once, then returned to the camp later. It was the second visit that convinced the witness and his friend to head back to the cabin. They arrived back at the cabin around 3 a.m. So again, you'd think that ex-military, experienced hunters are not going to be scared off by a bear. They're going to understand what a bear is, what it sounds like, how to scare it off. They didn't get a good look at this. So could this have been a bear? Yes. There's a lot of other stories where the bear thing comes up and I throw it out because it's either this person saw Bigfoot or they're lying. There's no real in between. This could have been a bear. It could have been a big cat. If they got spooked, like I said, in the dark, if you're not really seeing it, I can't really speak to it. There was definitely something there, and they're hearing wood knocks. They're hearing growls. So I don't know what to make of this one. Again, I defer to the witnesses when they say they are ex-military, when they say they are experienced hunters. You tend to believe them. This is not a city person who just went out camping for the first time and had an experience that you could say maybe you just heard a fox, maybe you heard a fisher, maybe it was a moose, maybe it was a deer, maybe it was a bear. These guys seem to know what they're talking about. So I tend to err on the side of their judgment. And for him to say this was walking on 2 feet, he heard bipedal footsteps and it was shaking the ground. That's heavy. I mean, black bear, that's all we have in New York. We don't have grizzlies or anything bigger than that. We just have black bear, and they can be big, but they're not huge like that. So very interesting. Very interesting story. Okay, so our next story is from 2002. This is a possible sighting by hunters near Bath. We're back near Bath. November 12th, 2002, Steuben County. Location about a half-mile off Shannon Road, northeast of Shannon Road. Nearest town is Bath. Nearest road is Shannon Road. Observed. While hunting with a friend on his farm during deer season this past November, we were walking the creek bottom to get up to a stand of pines at the edge of a small swamp on his property. After walking about 200 yards, we stopped for a bit to listen and observe, and maybe jump a deer crossing over. We were there about 10 minutes when we started to hear something above and just behind us. The creek bottom at that point has about 8-foot banks on both sides. We continued to hear the noises get closer, but it seemed to be going parallel to us on the deer trail. Again, we have paralleling. Having spotted bear recently, we thought it might be one and hoped it would cross about 60 yards in front of us. We moved a little further up and the noises stopped. Figuring the bear heard us, we stopped. It was quiet for about 20 minutes when it began again, only more hurried this time. At one point, I could see movement in the woods and at first thought it might have been a bear standing up, but it kept walking on the hind legs. It turned and came across the creek about 60 yards from us, and we just watched it run across the creek and up along the power line on the other side. It jumped down the bank and jumped back up on the other side. We couldn't get a clear look because of the pines and the fact that it was really moving when it came across the creek, but it was no bear. We both had been hunting for a good 25 years each, and we agreed it wasn't a bear or any other animal we have ever seen. We listened to it for about another 3 to 5 minutes, going through the pines and the brush. Then the noises just stopped. We went up and backtracked it as best we could, but lost the sign just the other side of his farm pond. Also noticed, didn't really hear anything from the animal, just it moving through the heavy brush. Other witnesses, just one besides himself, they were hunting. Other stories, not in the immediate area, but over on the other side of the hill, some of the other farmers have said they have heard things at night that weren't quote unquote normal. So really interesting. This is early morning, about 8:30 in the morning. So there's no follow-up for this one. So I don't know if they just couldn't get a hold of him or they didn't reach out yet. This one is interesting to me for the fact that it stood up. You know, they're seeing this on 2 legs. They thought it was a bear. They thought it maybe was standing up, but then this thing starts running. And just Google a video of a bear walking. They're clumsy. They can barely stand up. Barely, get it? They can barely stand up. They cannot run. They cannot run up embankments. They cannot run across streams. They're going to fall down back onto 4 legs. That's not their natural. They're not bipeds. They can do that. And again, them standing up is usually to reach food, or it's an intimidation tactic to, look bigger and scare you off. Or in the circus, they're trained to walk a couple of steps, but they're not crossing a creek. They're not walking up an embankment. So again, these guys either saw Bigfoot or they saw a person or they're making it up. There's no possibility this is a bear that ran across the creek. And again, you're talking experienced outdoorsmen, experienced hunters, people who are familiar with the local wildlife. They know what a bear looks like. And again, I love that they're not jumping to Bigfoot. They think they saw a bear, but then they're saying this thing is standing up. It's running across the creek. So really interesting. I like this story. Okay, the next story, it's from another hunter. Again, you get experienced people out there seeing these things. While taking a break during a deer drive, hunter sees 6-foot-tall creature run away down hillside. And this reminds me of when I did an episode of Bigfoot in the Adirondacks on Shaker Mountain. I will link to it below. But Josh and I came across a trail register where somebody had written in there that they saw a bear running up the mountain. on two legs. So just weird, weird stuff when people see these creatures running, and skeptics are going to try to tell you that it was a deer or a moose or a bear. I mean, the bear is the go-to. Bears are not running up or down hillsides on two legs. Just isn't going to happen. This one is from 1986, November. Not sure of the date, first week of deer gun season. Nearest town is Edison or Erwin. So back with Erwin again. Nearest road, Highway 415. I'm really not too sure. I relocated to Colorado and cannot remember without referring to a map. And again, a lot of times when these encounters happen, people see a UFO, they see a Bigfoot, they experience a ghost or whatever. They're not remembering the exact date and time. They can maybe tell you the time of year. Sometimes they can, but a lot of times people don't remember the exact date or time it happens, and they keep it to themselves. They're not out there telling people or, putting it on websites or writing it down. It's just in their head, and they know, oh, yeah, it was over the summer. I was camping. It may have been August. So we can't really hold people to always remember the exact date and time and location. But I will talk about what he says here. So, observed. Not quite sure what to write. I was hunting with some friends of mine outside of Addison, New York in November of 1986. I was the top man on a drive. I crested a hill and decided to take a break. Things were pretty slow as far as hunting. Typical fall day with no overcast, dry conditions. I just finished eating one of many baby Ruths when something caught my attention about 50 yards east of where I was sitting down. I looked towards the direction and noticed something that was black run very fast down the side of the hill. It happened so fast I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. It appeared to be about my height. I stand at 5'9". It ran with incredible speed. What is odd about the incident is that I had time to eat and sit down on a tree. At the time, I was not even in stealth mode. I always scan the area before I stop for breaks just in case I may have missed any game. I almost felt as if whatever it was observing me and had enough. It was definitely in a hurry to leave. I observed it only for, at best, 5 seconds. I could hear it break deadfall once I lost sight as it ran away. There are bears in the area I hunt, but this seemed to be taller than the average black bear. My first thought was it had to be a bear. I remember standing up startled once I made eye contact with the object running. It appeared to be at eye level. My second thought was maybe it was a black Angus cow that may have been loose from a farm. I was a little spooked from the incident, the same feeling you have when you stumble upon a grouse at close range. I thought again and surmised if it is a bear, it is a very large one. I was not far from the other end of the deer drive. I left the area and met up with my friends at the truck. I had asked them if they had seen a bear or any deer. They all said no. I did not tell them of the incident. So again, a lot of people just kind of keep this stuff to themselves. On August 5th, 1995, the Corning Leader newspaper wrote an article on a possible Bigfoot sighting near Rathbone, New York. This area is not far from where I was hunting. There were casts taken as well as hair samples by the Department of Environmental Conservation. To my knowledge, they were submitted to Cornell University for testing. And I guess there was no follow-up. Also noticed, refer to Leader archives for incident that occurred in August of 95. As stated in the report, I felt it had to be watching me and got spooked. She says it was mid-afternoon, clear, about 35, 40 degrees. There's no follow-up on this. There is a link to this article he's talking about. So I will link all these stories in the description below. So if you guys want to go through here and dig a little bit more, but I'm not going to read this whole article as well. I just thought this was a cool story because again, it's running down the mountain, which is weird, and he's not really saying Bigfoot here. He's saying he thought it was a bear, maybe a black cow, a big, dark, hairy thing running down the hill. He doesn't know what it was. He's thinking maybe Bigfoot, but he's not really definitely saying that. So interesting, but a little spooky that you're seeing these things out there. And these are hunters. These are people who know what they're shooting at. They need to know what they're shooting at before they pull the trigger. They need to be 100% sure that's not a person. That's not a guy in a ghillie suit. Even the types of animals, if you're shooting, you need to know what's in season and what's not. And you need to know, can I shoot a deer that is this young or this small? Fishermen have to do the same thing. If you catch something and it's too small, you got to throw it back. Or, so these guys know what they're doing. They know what they're observing. So, the mind may say, yeah, it's a bear running down the hill. But maybe it wasn't a bear. So very cool. Okay, so the last story I'm going to talk about tonight, this is a daylight sighting near a railroad bed and the Canisteo River. This happened in 79 or 80 in the spring. He's saying April 21st of 1980. But again, sounds like he might be a little iffy on the year. Steuben County, he says, my son and I were building fences for our cows. We were on the hill behind our house. There was a great view of the valley. There was a work crew working on the railroad at the edge of our property. I noticed this large animal come up out of the river. I thought it was a bear. Again, we're hearing, their initial thoughts is that it was a bear. He says, my son noticed it also. It was dark and walked like a man, so on 2 feet. In comparison to the men on the railroad tracks, it is 2 to 3 times larger than the men working. It had a large head that seemed to fall onto the shoulder with not much of a neck. It had longer arms and a slight sway as it walked. The men on the railroad were behind the hedgerow and would not be able to see the animal. It went around the bend in the river and disappeared. The next day, I got to thinking about it and went down to the river to see if I could find any tracks. I went to the spot where it came out of the river. I was unable to find any tracks. I feel it came out because there was a trash buildup of debris, tires, and all sorts of things. Rather than trying to get through that mess, it walked around. I think the animal was using the Canisteo River for a road out of sight. So the nearest road is Country Road 29. Nothing else was noticed. It was just him and his son, late morning, early afternoon, bright, warm day. There is a follow-up investigation report here by Paul Mateja again. He says, the witness provided the following additional information. Both the witness and his son had seen the animal. His son was 14 years old at the time. The sighting occurred in late spring. It was a very dry spring, which may explain why the witness could not find tracks the next day. They were approximately 3/10 of a mile away from the animal. The animal had a large T-shaped frame with very broad shoulders. It was dark brown, black in color. It walked approximately 400 to 500 feet along the riverbank, then turned a bend and out of sight. The railroad workers were approximately 200 feet away from the animal, but could not see it because of the large hedgerow separating them. The witness still lives in the area, but has not seen nor heard anything unusual since this one incident. So again, you have these people who live out there. They know the wildlife out there. Their initial thoughts are, oh, I'm seeing a bear. And then it's walking on 2 legs. It looks like a big man. It's bigger than these men working on the railroad. These are people who know what they're seeing. These are people who are experienced. Why would a hunter or someone who's an outdoorsman just one time misidentify a bear and think it was Bigfoot? These don't seem to be people who are into Bigfoot. They're out there, they're hunting. And you hear this from so many other hunters. I mean, hunters who have never experienced anything will tell you there's no Bigfoot out there because they've never seen it. They've never experienced it. They're just out there for 30, 40, 50 years. And if they don't ever have an encounter, they're telling you, I don't believe in Bigfoot. They're not out there. I've never seen any proof of it until they do, until you have someone who's like, I've been hunting for 42 years and then I saw this thing and I don't want to be hunting anymore. I'm not going to hunt in that area anymore. I'm not going to go out by myself anymore. I'm getting a bigger gun. You hear these stories all the time that these are guys who are used to being out there. They're not Bigfoot enthusiasts. They're not out there looking for Bigfoot. They're out there trying to hunt deer, trying to hunt bears, trying to be fishing. They're outdoors people. They're camping. They just want to be out there. They're not thinking Bigfoot. And most of these stories you hear, oh, I thought it was a bear. I thought it was a bear. They're trying to reconcile this with what they know. Is this a bear? Is this a deer? Is this a man? Is this, this thing that's walking in front of me on 2 legs? Is this another hunter? Is this another human being? And I have never seen Bigfoot, but I can only imagine what your brain does when you see something that shouldn't exist. And your brain is trying to tell you it's got to be a bear. It's got to be another person. It's got to be a tall man in a ghillie suit. And you're going through these and it's like, nope, 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 nope. It's not a bear. It's not a man. What is it? It's this 7 foot tall, hairy, ape-like creature. So a lot of good stories here tonight from experienced outdoors people. Very interesting. So there's your stories, everybody. Some more Bigfoot this week from Steuben County in Western New York. We loved our time in Letchworth. It was really interesting. There were many different hikers. We were all spaced out. So we weren't really on top of each other. I mean, the very beginning of the hike, you kind of are. And then as the hike goes on, people get spaced out, and you go through some really civilized areas like playgrounds and ball fields, and you go through some areas that are just real wilderness areas and real thick. We had seen a deer. We saw a deer kind of run. I guess he heard us and ran. A few points we heard some big things in the woods, and even Rebecca turned to me and was like, "What is that?" Because it's just like a big loud crash, and probably a bear. I don't think bears would be around with that many people walking through, but it was something big, and it happened to us twice, and both times it was like deep off, way off the trail, deep in the woods. Couldn't see anything, just heard like a crash through the trees. And we joked and we were like, "Oh, Bigfoot," and Rebecca doesn't believe in Bigfoot. Hence the teasing that I talk to myself about creatures that don't exist. But um, it's you're out there, and when you're deep in the woods, and most skeptics don't go out, they sit at home in their living rooms at their computers, and they'll tell you saw a bear. They've never gone hunting or fishing or camping in their lives. But when you're out there and you hear these things or you see these things, and even if you don't, it's just you see the thickness of the woods, you see the thickness of the forest, you see how vast it is. And something could be 10 feet from you hiding behind a tree and you'd never see it because you're just walking, you're trying not to trip over the rocks and the roots, and you're worried about other things, but something that knows the woods and knows how to camouflage itself could easily be there watching you. These things could exist. So it's good to get out there, get out in nature. It was healing for me. I love just being out and walking and getting fresh air and seeing the waterfalls and trees. And we did see some bear scat out there. So I know there's bears out there, some big, big piles of scat. Should have taken pictures because maybe it was Bigfoot scat. Who knows? But again, if you guys know of any sightings in Letchworth, please shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. If you have any other Bigfoot stories or any weird odd and untold stories that you would like to share, please shoot me an email. I'd love to have you on the show. And until next time, everybody, question everything, question these stories, question, can Bigfoot exist? Are people just misidentifying bears? I don't believe so, but question everything. And we will see you next week, everybody. Rock and roll.